Before we leap into this episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, I have a request. For the last episode of this season, I'll be covering what we can all do to combat climate change. Maybe you're working to reduce your carbon footprint or pushing for political changes. I'd like to capture your ideas and play them on the podcast. You can share yours by calling 443-347-2380. Leave a 1 to 2 minute message on our Google Voice service. Don't forget to introduce yourself at the beginning and where you're from. The deadline for submissions is December 31st. Again, that number is 443-347-2380. And the deadline is December 31st, 2021. Thanks, and on with the episode. From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the Bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode... Oh, you're a big one. It's a stampede. Well, it only seems like one. Michael Heller is the manager of a livestock farm outside Upper Marlboro, Maryland. He just pulled up to the edge of a field in his mule, a kind of golf cart on steroids. He throws open a gate, and with some coaxing, "Come on, Dad! Dolly! Dolly! Dolly!" the cows start pouring through at a trot. There are about 40 cows in all, most with honey-brown coats, just starting to get shaggy with the approach of winter. As the herd squeezes through the narrow opening, they enter a new fenced-in pasture where the grass is fresh and tall. Almost immediately, the mooing subsides, replaced by the sound of tongues ripping up ribbons of grass. Here in one pastoral snapshot, cows happily chewing on long blades of grass, we see an example of the dichotomous relationship between agriculture and climate change. On the one hand, farming can make climate change worse. Cows are the main source of greenhouse gases in the agricultural sector. In a year, a single cow can produce up to 270 pounds of methane. But agriculture can also be one of our biggest weapons in the fight against rising greenhouse gas levels. How can that be? Heller tells me that it starts beneath our feet.
Soil is the second biggest sink or storage place we have for carbon behind oceans. Soil happens to be one that farmers have some control over. So agriculture has a great opportunity to contribute positively to climate change by building soil.
During this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're examining climate change. It's happening in the here and now, and not just at the North Pole in Antarctica. We're talking right here in the Chesapeake Bay region. With each episode, we're taking a close look at one slice of this new reality. Think of this as a snapshot in time before things get worse, when we as a society can maybe still change the future. We can't have a discussion about climate change in the Chesapeake Bay watershed without talking about farms. Agriculture is the second largest land use in the 64,000 square mile drainage basin, accounting for nearly 30% of all that land. As you know well at this point in the season, the Mid-Atlantic is already experiencing the effects of a changing climate. It's getting hotter, rainfall is heavier, flash droughts are popping up with greater frequency. If you rely on a stable climate, like a farmer, these changes imperil your livelihood. Today, we'll look at the problems that farmers are facing, but we'll set aside plenty of time for examining the surprising potential that agriculture holds in keeping the planet from veering too far off the rails? We'll talk about that right after a quick break.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you in part by Greenfin Studio, offering marketing and communications services for a greener world. Their team combines strategy, creativity, and scientific insight, setting them apart when conservation, sustainability, and scientific organizations need help telling their stories. See what they can do for you at greenfinstudio.com.
Welcome back. On today's episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're examining the bitter harvest that's in store for agriculture in the Bay region if the climate continues to change. As I was saying, agriculture can cause more climate degradation, and it can be a solution. In the meantime, farmers are grappling with a climate in flux.
There's really no facet of agriculture that won't have some impact one way or the other.
Ernie Shea is a board member of the University of Maryland's Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology and also the nonprofit group Solutions from the Land. In 2021, the Maryland General Assembly tasked state staffers with assessing how vulnerable agriculture is to the changing climate. It's the state's first climate assessment focused solely on agriculture. Right now, Shea and his co-authors are still in the beginning stages of their work, but they have a good idea of what they'll find based on what they're already seeing.
What we have been experiencing over decades is a fairly constant water regime, and now these variations will create, we anticipate, some significant challenges for Maryland farmers.
If you're a farmer, water is a pretty important component of what you do. If you get too much at one time, or the opposite, not enough for too long, your crops are going to be in trouble. At first blush, it would seem that climate change would be a boon for farmers in the Bay region. A warming planet is expected to translate into a longer growing period in the Northeast. Since 1895, the growing season has expanded by 23 days in Maryland and 19 days in Pennsylvania. Both are greater than the national average of 14 days. But those gains could be offset by changes in rainfall.
So instead of 1 and 2 inch rains, we might be expecting more frequent 3 and 4 inch rains that come faster.
If you're a fan of locally produced wines, you are already getting a taste of this phenomenon. My wife and I are big fans of Virginia wines. We take a handful of trips each year to the wine country around Charlottesville and Loudoun County. You may recall that the summer and fall of 2018 was one long monsoon season. Much of Virginia saw 60 inches of rain that year, about 20 inches above normal. If climate predictions for our region prove correct, this is exactly the kind of barrage we can expect to see with more frequency. The 2018 rains knocked Virginia's vineyards back on their heels, resulting in a 35% reduction in yields from 2017. And what did make it into bottles that year was often of below average quality, particularly the reds, which are more finicky to begin with. So here's a tip for wine drinkers. Before you buy a 2018 Virginia wine, try it to make sure that it isn't marred by climate change. But it's not just excess rain that's the problem, according to Puneet Sarastava, a University of Maryland researcher and Shea's co-author.
Flash droughts, so we are expected to see a lot of intense storm and in between long dry periods, and that might necessitate is building a irrigation infrastructure to provide water during those flash drought periods.
It may sound odd to have heavier periods of rainfall accompanied by a greater frequency of droughts. But that's because we're talking about getting those rains in quick, torrential bursts. Rising temperatures will likely increase evaporation, leaving soils drier, so we can expect to see longer dry periods in between those heavy rains. Now we get into talking about the costs of adaptation. To offset those dry spells, more farmers are turning to irrigation. From 2002 to 2017, the amount of irrigated cropland in Maryland increased by more than 50%. That water can save a crop in a time of crisis, but it also increases a farm's expenses. A similar cost calculation is happening because of rising air temperatures, Shea said.
Livestock are very susceptible to heat and humidity. We're a big poultry producing state, still a fairly big dairy producing state. So, what response mitigation options do poultry producers have when higher temperatures may force increased energy costs to cool houses, as one example?
The Chesapeake Bay region is home to some of the country's biggest chicken-producing areas, most notably on the Delmarva Peninsula and within Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The birds are raised in long, low-ceilinged barns that must be kept cool in the summer and warm in the winter. As Shea said, hotter summers are likely to increase energy demands on these farms. But there's an opposite side to that equation. Warmer winters will help them save money on heating. A 2019 study conducted by researchers at Carnegie Mellon University suggested that, at first glance, the savings in heating costs will likely outweigh the increased cost for cooling. Good news, right? Maybe not. Traditionally, chicken houses are cooled by evaporative cooling pads, which draw in outside air through water-saturated pads. Fans make it feel more comfortable through a wind chill effect. That tried-and-true cooling method may no longer be cost-effective, though, as streaks of 95-degree or hotter days occur more often, according to the study. Farmers may need to switch to other cooling technologies, such as air conditioning. This will almost certainly lead to greater electricity usage and more expense. This gets at one of the main points of the vulnerability assessment, Shea said.
The good news is there are options that producers will have, but if they don't know what's coming, they'll be flying, so to speak, blind. So what we're trying to do at the Hughes Center and with our government partners is help producers get up to speed with the latest scientific information so they can make informed decisions.
I could certainly fill up the rest of this episode and an entire podcast season listing the ways in which climate change is upending agriculture as we know it. What's more interesting, I think, is looking at the path forward. Farmers aren't merely helpless victims of climate change. They have dominion over broad swaths of land, not to mention a big chunk of the economy. Decisions they make with their land today can have a lasting and meaningful impact on tomorrow's climate. This, according to a growing movement in the agricultural community that strives to fight climate change from the ground up.
We don't farm quite the way a lot of our neighbors do.
Hannah Smith Brubaker owns and manages an organic farm on 75 acres in Juniata County in Pennsylvania. She and her partner raise laying hens and sheep for fiber, as well as 50 different types of vegetables and berries. It's a farm, to be sure, but also a mission.
There's no question that we have to all be doing everything we can to be mitigating the risks associated with climate change, and continuing to practice extractive agriculture is not going to help us with that regard.
Now, there's a term there. I mean, I'm sure most people have heard the term extractive mining. What is extractive agriculture?
I think it's just a mindset that we as humans can just take from the land. If we're just continuously growing on the land, but not, for example, returning nutrients or building soil or in some way trying to limit our impact, it's going to degrade, and eventually it's not going to be productive.
So what's the alternative? Sustainable agriculture, she says.
So sustainable agriculture is really being cognizant of the ecology around us when we're farming, that we're part of an ecosystem, that we want to make sure is certainly not negatively impacted by our agriculture, but hopefully maybe we've even been able to improve it.
According to Farmers for a Sustainable Future, an industry group under the American Farm Bureau Federation, sustainable practices are catching on. Citing farm census data, the group reports that in the 5 years between 2012 and 2017, solar energy use on farms went up nearly 150%, and wind power usage went up more than 50%. Meanwhile, cover crops, which are planted outside the growing season to prevent soil loss, surged from 10 million acres to 15 million acres nationwide. And there was a nearly 10% increase in the amount of acreage left untilled between crops in an effort to retain organic matter in the soil. On the opposite side, there was a 24% decrease in acreage under conventional tillage, which is less environmentally friendly. Add it all up, and you can see progress along a broad front. You may recall Brubaker saying that not many farms in her part of the world look like hers, but she pointed out that sustainability isn't just for organic farms.
I'm not much of one for sort of saying, this specific type of agriculture or that specific type of agriculture is the best or the worst, because like I mentioned, I have seen many conventional farmers really transitioning to no-till and putting forth a lot of effort around conservation and the ecology of their farm.
Brubaker is the executive director of PASA, a research and education organization for farmers involved in sustainable agriculture. The 31-year-old group is based in Harrisburg. Most of its members are in the Northeast. It conducts farm training events and does research.
The organization started 31 years ago, was actually a conference before it was an organization. And it was just a bunch of farmers who got together who wanted to talk about what was going on their farms and start doing peer-to-peer education. And that has stuck with us for our whole history.
Since 2016, the group has led a citizen science research effort tracking soil health at more than 100 farms in Pennsylvania and Maryland. In this, one of the largest and most diverse studies of its kind, researchers are finding that a no-till strategy can still yield optimal soil health. It takes some work, perhaps planting cover crops or even resorting to some herbicide use to control weeds, but it can be done. A changing climate, however, could undermine these efforts, the initial reporting suggests. During that historically wet 2018, participating farms in Pennsylvania and Maryland experienced an average drop of 50 to 60% in aggregate stability. That means the ability of soil to resist disintegration. When rushing water knocks soil particles loose, they can fill in surface pores, and when that dries, it forms a hard crust that prevents water from seeping down to reach plant roots. That's not what you want as a farmer. All the more reason to start building soil health now, Brubaker says.
Broaden out across the whole state, and all farms are doing soil improvement, and all farms are able to absorb more water. We're talking about billions of gallons of water that can be absorbed that aren't being absorbed right now when we have these flooding events.
Are we in the weeds yet? Let's head back out to the farm with Michael Heller to hear about the differences these practices make on the ground. We're riding on the mule beside a lush, leafy crop that looms above us and kind of looks like corn, but also doesn't.
We stop right here, for instance. You see these plants that if I walk in here 3 feet, you won't be able to see me. That just gives you a sense of how dense this vegetation is, but already I'm hidden from you.
Yeah, so, you're gone. It's like the meme of Homer Simpson where he backs into the hedge and disappears. Heller really does vanish from sight, even though he's only a few paces away. He reappears and explains what this is all about.
This is what we would call a cover crop. Probably the most valuable crop we'll plant, but we will never harvest it. We grow this just to build the soil.
While it grows, The plants grip the soil in place, slowing erosion. Instead of harvesting this crop, Heller will leave it right where it is. When the plants wilt and die, they will return to the soil, nourishing a rich universe of subterranean life. And what is this strange-looking crop? It's actually a couple different types. It looks like corn.
Well, it is related to corn. This is millet, and it's very useful because it grows quickly under hot conditions. This other is called sun hemp, and it's a legume. And the beauty of a legume is it captures nitrogen from the atmosphere and makes it available to the plants.
Making that nitrogen available not only for this crop, but for the next crop. In this case, vegetables. No fertilizer necessary. Millet and sun hemp are not typical examples of cover crops in these parts. What you tend to see planted in the fall and hanging tough until spring are sprouts of rye and wheat. At Heller's farm, trying different things is the point. This hilly farm actually belongs to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. The Claggett family donated the former tobacco farm to the environmental group so it could be run as an educational working farm. To be sure, many organizations advocate for the adoption of cover crops and other environmentally friendly practices on farms. If the Claggett farm stands out, it's for its size and the length of the group's devotion to the project. The farm covers nearly 300 acres of rural Prince George's County and has been operated by the Bay Foundation for nearly 40 years. Heller has been there from the beginning. The Foundation's interest in running a farm grew out of evidence in the restoration effort's infancy that agriculture is the Bay's biggest source of pollution, he said.
So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation said, wow, if agriculture is such a big, important source, it would be wonderful if we could operate a farm, understand the complexity that farmers face, but also use the farm as a forum to talk about what is it about farming that is positive and what are the problems with agriculture.
Soil health doesn't just improve overnight. So the Claggett farm presents a rare glimpse at what a farm can look like if given enough time and effort.
Over time on this farm, when I first came here almost 40 years ago, the organic matter levels ran about 1.2 to 1.5%. Today, they're all over 4%.
As we have heard, that's a boon for the Bay, because that sponge-like soil can hold more water, reducing the amount of runoff pollution. Here, farmers can see conservation in action and decide for themselves what's right for their farms. Over the years, many conservation practices have soared in popularity in the Bay watershed and beyond. For example, aided by state and federal cost-sharing programs, cover crops like those planted at the Claggett farm are becoming a staple. The last agricultural census in 2017 showed 410,000 acres of cover crops in Maryland, an increase of 22% over the previous census just 5 years earlier. In Pennsylvania, bean counters recorded 595,000 acres, a 28% increase. The Bay Foundation sells its produce directly to consumers and sets aside a share of it for people living in or near poverty. But the 20-acre vegetable patch is only a small part of the carbon sequestration story here. Most of the acreage is given over to pasture, thoughtfully chewed by sheep and cattle. Time to hop back on the mule. As we ride, Heller says something surprising. Raising cows and sheep can be a positive force for climate change.
If you manage the pastures they're in well.
This idea that cattle and sheep can fight climate change is a bit counterintuitive. You've probably seen an avalanche of articles stating how going vegan or vegetarian can greatly reduce your carbon footprint. And they're not wrong. A wide-ranging review of current scholarship led by the University of Copenhagen in 2019 suggested that meat isn't always bad. Straight off, it showed that yes, a 100% vegan diet has the least environmental impact. But you can obtain a similar impact, it found, by greatly reducing your meat and dairy intake. The Claggett farm demonstrates that some changes in production methods could lead to more sustainable meat. As with the vegetable side of the operation, it starts with the soil.
On a continuously grazed pasture, cows are a negative force for climate change.
That's your typical livestock farm. A farmer has a huge field, and the cows munch on the grass until little more than nubs are left behind. This practice is so prevalent that really it's hard to imagine a pasture covered with anything but short grass. But surrounding us here at the Claggett farm is a dense thicket of turf, brushing the middle of your calf or higher. It's all part of the sequestration plan, Heller tells me.
Tall grass has deep roots, and deep roots are critical for sequestering carbon. The way carbon gets stored in the soil from the atmosphere is plants take it in when they're photosynthesizing. They turn it into sugars and then have it run out the roots at the bottom. And it's that carbon going out the roots as much as 2 or 3 feet or more in the ground that is the carbon that is being stored.
How does he keep his grass so long? Instead of allowing the cattle to feed on it continuously, he moves them just about daily from one fenced-off area to another. The farm is carved up into more than 100 paddocks, as they're called.
The most important thing with pasture is to let the pasture rest. So I try to let it rest 40 to 60 days before cows will come back to a field that they have been on.
Okay. After Heller opens the gate to one of the paddocks, the cows come pouring out into a field of tall, delicious-looking grass. Immediately, they bow their heads to the ground, tongues spiraling around tufts of green blades. The feast is on. A few minutes later, the scene repeats itself over at the sheep field, only cuter this time.
Okay, we're ready, guys. Okay. So, okay, guys, you ready to move? Let's go. Come on. Yep, let's go. Come on.
Okay.
Here we go. Come here.
Nobody wants that crap. Yes, that's the sound of a sheep trying to get fresh with me. He was not happy with me declining his advances. True, Heller admits. He could get all the environmental benefit by simply growing healthy grass and taking the cows and the sheep out of the equation. But then there wouldn't be an economic benefit. When farming is practiced this way, slower, with more attention to the soil, environmental and economic benefits, he says, can go hand in hand.
The sheep and the cows are making really good productive use of these pastures. They turn it into a nutrient-dense, very rich protein that is a healthy source of nutrition for humans.
A pasture-based farm can even save farmers money in the long run, he says. Typically, dairy cows spend all their lives, and beef cows the last few months of theirs, in barns on concrete floors. You've got to bring the food to them. A University of Maryland study looked at pasture-based versus confined systems, examining the balance sheets of 62 farms in Maryland and Pennsylvania. On the labor side, confined dairy operations spent $193 per cow, while grazing operations spent $66, a third of that amount. Now, there are other considerations, of course. Grazing requires much more land, so that's an added cost. Confined operations generated about 25% more income from milk sales because their cows produced more milk. But pasture-based operations got more money on the back end when they sold their cows. In the end, the study found that confined farms raked in much more income, but also had a lot more cash going the other way in expenses. As a result, the typical pasture-based dairy farm netted a slightly higher profit margin than its confined brethren, $53,000 a year versus $48,000. Here's something you don't hear a lot about during climate change discussions: hope. Do farmers and consumers need to make changes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Absolutely. But as you can see on a farm not far from the nation's capital, these changes don't have to be revolutionary. Heller, one last time.
So agriculture really has probably the biggest opportunity of any segment of the production world to really improve climate change by capturing carbon.
Yep. Thanks to Greenfin Studio, which combines creativity and communication savvy with scientific insight. Visit greenfinstudio.com to see how they can help your organization engage a wider audience. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at bayjournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.